Some disappearances are not acts of fear, they are acts of survival. The first thing Ethan Whitmore saw was the boy's eyes. In the center of the Whitmore Foundation's winter gala, beneath chandeliers that scattered gold light across polished marble and crystal glasses, the 7-year-old lifted his face toward the stage, and the entire room seemed to tilt. Gray-blue eyes. His eyes. For one suspended second, Ethan forgot the investors, the cameras, the applause that had followed his keynote speech. He forgot the billion-dollar merger waiting on his phone. All he could see was the child standing beside a woman he had spent 6 years trying to find. Amara Brooks. She stood near the back of the ballroom in a black silk dress that caught the light like still water, one hand wrapped gently around the boy's shoulder. Her posture was calm, elegant, untouched by the whispers already spreading table to table. She hadn't changed in the ways that mattered. The same quiet strength in her chin, the same stillness that once made him feel like the loudest rooms in Manhattan had gone silent. But there was something new now, something harder, forged in distance and time. Ethan stepped down from the stage without hearing the moderator call his name. The crowd parted instinctively, tuxedos and gowns blurring into shadows as he moved toward her. The little boy looked up again, curious, unafraid, his small fingers tightening around a toy spaceship. Every feature hit Ethan like a memory dragged into daylight. The shape of his mouth, the slight crease between his brows. Even the way he stood, steady and observant, mirrored the old photographs Ethan's mother used to keep from his own childhood. Amara, he said, and her name felt like 6 years of sleepless nights condensed into one breath. She met his eyes, unreadable. You finally stopped searching in all the wrong places. Her voice was low, smooth, impossible to forget. Ethan's pulse hammered so hard, he barely trusted his own voice. Is he? Yes, she said, cutting through the question before it fully formed. No hesitation. No softness. Just truth, clean and final. The ballroom, noise dimmed into a distant hum. Ethan stared at the boy, whose attention had shifted to the enormous ice sculpture near the Champagne Tower. His son, the son he never knew existed. The son who had grown from a sonogram image locked in his memory into a living, breathing child standing 10 feet away in a navy blazer and tiny sneakers. 1,000 questions crashed through him, but Amara's face stopped him. There was no triumph in her expression, no revenge, only a dignity so complete it made his expensive world feel suddenly small. Then the boy pressed a hand lightly to his chest and winced. Amara dropped instantly to one knee, her calm cracking for the first time. Noah, she whispered, brushing curls from his forehead. Ethan moved forward on instinct, but her eyes flashed up to stop him. In that one look, 6 years of silence became something sharper. If you really want to help him, she said, her voice trembling at the edges for the first time, then you need to learn why I ran the night I found out I was pregnant, because it wasn't from you, Ethan. It was because of what your mother threatened to do. The words hit Ethan harder than any market crash ever had. Around them, the gala still shimmered with soft jazz, crystal laughter, and the polished ease of old money. But for him the room had narrowed to Amara kneeling beside Noah under the gold wash of chandelier light. The boy's small hand stayed pressed to his chest, his breathing shallow but steady, and Amara's fingers moved with practiced calm, adjusting the collar of his blazer and whispering something too soft for anyone else to hear. Ethan crouched a few feet away, every instinct in him pulling closer, but he stopped where her eyes had drawn the line. 6 years ago, she had vanished in the middle of the night with nothing but a suitcase and a secret. Tonight she had returned with the living proof of everything he had lost. What did my mother do? He asked, his voice lower now, stripped of the CO steel that usually filled boardrooms. Amara looked up slowly, and for the first time he saw the exhaustion behind her control, the kind carved by years of carrying too much alone. She came to me the night after my doctor's appointment, she said. Noah's breathing began to settle, his fingers loosening around the toy spaceship, but Amara kept one hand over his heart as if memory itself still needed protecting. She already knew I was pregnant before I had the courage to tell you. Ethan's jaw tightened. His mother had always known everything first. Market leaks, board votes, political donations, family weaknesses. But this was different. This was Amara. This was his child. She told me your board was about to finalize the Harrington acquisition. Amara continued. her gaze fixed on Noah instead of Ethan. A scandal about an unexpected pregnancy with a black woman from your legal team would make the shareholders question your judgment. She said they would destroy your future before you ever had the chance to build it. Ethan felt the ballroom air turn cold despite the warmth of the room. He remembered that week too clearly now. Endless calls. Emergency meetings. His mother insisting he stay in Boston for 48 more hours to secure the deal. He had believed every word she said because back then he still mistook control for protection. That is not enough to make you run, he said quietly, though part of him already feared the answer. Amara finally met his eyes, and the hurt there was older than anger. She told me if I stayed, your son would grow up as the story that ruined you. The word son landed between them like a bell. Ethan's chest tightened as he looked at Noah again, the boy now leaning lightly against Amara's shoulder, calmer but pale beneath the ballroom lights. She said your name would survive, Amara whispered, but mine would be dragged through every paper in Manhattan. She promised that if I disappeared before dawn, you would be too consumed by the merger to come after me in time. Ethan's hands curled into fists at his sides, not in rage but in the helpless realization of how completely his life had been managed. Every sleepless year, he spent searching private schools, hospital records, and relocation databases suddenly took on a cruel new shape. He had not been searching for a woman who left him. He had been searching for the truth his own family buried. Noah looked up then, his gray-blue eyes locking on Ethan's with quiet curiosity. "Mom," he said softly, "is this him?" The question, innocent and direct, shattered what little composure Ethan had left. Amara smoothed a hand over Noah's curls and nodded once. "Yes, sweetheart. This is Ethan. Not Dad. Not yet." Ethan accepted the distance in that choice because he had not earned anything more. Noah studied him for a long moment, then lifted the toy spaceship in his hand. "Do you know anything about Saturn rockets?" Ethan blinked, the sudden shift almost surreal in the middle of emotional wreckage. A broken laugh escaped him, softer than anything his employees had ever heard. "I built one with my grandfather when I was your age," he said. Noah's eyes widened with interest, and for one fragile second the years between loss and possibility seemed to fold inward. But Amara rose to her feet, guiding Noah gently beside her, and the look she gave Ethan was steady, warning, and unfinished. "If you want to know him," she said, "tomorrow morning. St. Jude Children's Cardiology, 8 o'clock. Then you will see what your mother's choices really cost." By 7:53 the next morning, Ethan Whitmore was already standing in the glass-walled lobby of St. Jude Children's Cardiology, the scent of fresh coffee and antiseptic mingling in the cool morning air. Manhattan outside was waking in silver light, cabs streaming past the hospital entrance, but inside everything felt quieter, more honest, as if money and reputation had to wait at the revolving doors. He had spent the entire night replaying Amara's words, hearing his mother's voice in memories he had once mistaken for guidance. Now every detail felt poisoned by omission. The polished black town car, the urgent board summons to Boston, the way his mother had insisted she would handle distractions. He had believed she meant the press. He never imagined she meant Amara and the child she carried. When the elevator doors opened on the 7th floor, he saw them before they saw him. Noah sat in a chair too large for his small frame, swinging his legs above the tile floor, a children's astronomy book open across his lap. His blazer from the gala had been replaced by a navy hoodie and sneakers with silver laces, making him look less like a revelation and more like what he truly was, a little boy trying to be brave in a place full of unknowns. Amara sat beside him, her hand resting lightly on his shoulder, her face composed but pale from a night with too little sleep. Ethan slowed as he approached, unwilling to break the fragile peace of the moment. Noah looked up first, and the cautious curiosity in those gray-blue eyes struck Ethan with the same force as the night before. "You came," Noah said. Ethan gave the smallest smile. "I said I would." The boy considered that, then nodded as if quietly filing the fact away. Amara stood, smoothing the sleeve of her coat, the motion graceful but guarded. "Dr. Ellis wants to review his latest scans this morning," she said. Her voice was professional, almost detached, but there was a thread of strain beneath it that Ethan now knew how to hear. "The episodes have been happening more often." Ethan looked at Noah, whose fingers had returned to the edge of his chest almost unconsciously. A habit formed from fear, from pain, from too many moments when his own body had betrayed him. What exactly is wrong? Ethan asked, forcing himself to keep his tone steady. Amara held his gaze for a long second before answering. He was born with a congenital rhythm condition. Most days he is fine, but stress, exhaustion, even excitement can trigger it. Ethan felt the words settle into him with terrible clarity. Last night at the gala had not just been emotional chaos. It had been dangerous for Noah. And still Amara had brought him there, not for revenge, but because the truth had reached a point where it could no longer stay hidden. The nurse called Noah's name, and the little boy slipped his book into his backpack before standing. For a heartbeat he hesitated, then looked up at Ethan. "Do you want to come with us?" The question was so simple, so trusting, that Ethan felt something in his chest give way. Not break. Open. "Yes," he said quietly. "I would like that." Inside the consultation room, Dr. Ellis spread the scans across the monitor, blue and white waves pulsing in clean digital lines. She explained medications, monitoring, possible procedures, and long-term outlooks, but Ethan heard the real story beneath the medical terms. Amara had been carrying this alone for 7 years. Every late-night hospital visit, every skipped field trip, every moment Noah pressed his hand to his chest and looked to her for reassurance. He glanced sideways at Amara and saw not weakness, but the kind of strength that had no audience. The kind built in waiting rooms, in whispered reassurances, in bills paid and fears swallowed before they reached a child's ears. When the doctor stepped out, silence settled softly over the room. Noah was distracted by the heartbeat animation on the wall monitor, fascinated by its rhythm. Ethan turned to Amara. "You should not have had to do this alone." Her eyes softened, but only slightly. "I did what mothers do. I stayed." The words were not accusation. They were truth. Ethan looked at Noah, at the son who now traced the glowing line of a digital heartbeat with his fingertip, and understood that redemption would not come from apologies or grand gestures. It would come from showing up for the ordinary, terrifying, sacred moments he had already missed. Then Noah looked back at him with a shy smile and held up his astronomy book. "After this, can you tell me about Saturn's rings?" Ethan nodded, his throat tightening in a way he did not fight. "I can tell you everything I know." And for the first time in 7 years, the future did not feel like something lost. It felt like something waiting. The late morning sun spilled through the hospital's floor-to-ceiling windows, laying soft rectangles of light across the pediatric waiting area as Ethan sat beside Noah with the astronomy book spread open across both their laps. The room no longer felt as sterile as it had an hour earlier. With Noah's quiet questions filling the space, it had softened into something almost ordinary. "So the rings are not solid?" Noah asked, eyes wide as he traced the illustration of Saturn with one small finger. Ethan smiled, leaning closer so the boy could see the details. "No, they are made of ice, rock, and dust. Millions of pieces, all moving together." Noah's brows lifted in fascination, and the expression was so achingly familiar that Ethan had to steady his breathing. He remembered making the same face at age 7, sitting on the floor of his grandfather's library in Connecticut, turning pages of an old NASA encyclopedia while dreaming of worlds beyond what he could touch. The memory landed differently now, not as nostalgia, but as a thread connecting him to the sun he had never known existed. Across from them, Amara watched in silence, a paper cup of tea cooling in her hands. She did not interrupt, but Ethan could feel the cautious shift in the air around her. It was not trust yet. It was recognition. She was seeing him in a room where there were no shareholders, no cameras, no assistants filtering every second of his day. Just a father learning how to sit still. Noah turned the page and pointed to a diagram of a rocket launch. "Have you ever seen one in real life?" Ethan nodded. "Cape Canaveral. I was 12. My grandfather flew me down to Florida just to watch the shuttle launch." Noah's mouth opened in awe. "For real? For real?" Ethan chuckled softly. It shook the ground for miles. You could feel it in your chest. Noah grinned. Then the smile faded into something thoughtful. "I feel stuff in my chest too," he said quietly, his hand drifting to the familiar place over his heart. The words were simple, but they emptied the warmth from Ethan's lungs. Before he could respond, Amara set her tea down and moved beside Noah, kneeling to meet his eyes. "Not the same way, sweetheart," she said gently. What you feel is something we understand, and we are taking care of it. Noah nodded, trusting her instantly, and Ethan saw again the life Amara had built around safety, honesty, and calm. A life where fear was translated into something a child could carry. The nurse stepped into the doorway then, clipboard in hand, smiling at Noah. Dr. Ellis wants one more stress test before lunch. Noah sighed dramatically, closing the book. Do I have to? Ethan surprised himself by answering before Amara could. How about this? He said, keeping his tone light. If you finish the test like the brave astronaut you are, I will take you to the planetarium this weekend. Noah's eyes lit up so fast, it was like watching dawn break. The one on the Upper West Side? Ethan nodded. The giant one with the star show. Noah looked at Amara for permission, and she hesitated just long enough for Ethan to feel the weight of the moment. Then she gave the smallest nod. If your doctor clears you, we can talk about it. Noah slipped off the chair, suddenly energized, and followed the nurse down the hallway. Ethan stood slowly, watching him go, the backpack bouncing lightly against his small shoulders. When the boy disappeared around the corner, the silence between Ethan and Amara settled into something less hostile than before. You did not have to promise him that, she said, though her voice lacked the sharp edge it once carried. Ethan turned toward her. I know. He paused, searching for the truth instead of the polished answer. I wanted to. Amara looked through the window toward the hallway Noah had taken, her reflection faint against the city skyline beyond the glass. He has spent years asking why other kids have fathers at school events and science fairs. Her voice dropped, thinner now, worn by memories she rarely lets surface. I always told him some people arrive late, but that does not mean they never cared. Ethan swallowed hard. The grace in that sentence undid him more than blame ever could. She had protected Noah not only from fear, but from bitterness. Even after everything. He stepped closer, careful not to crowd her space. I cannot change the years I missed, he said quietly, but I can change what comes next. Amara finally looked at him, and in her eyes he saw something fragile enough to matter. Not forgiveness. Possibility. Then do not disappear when it stops being dramatic, she said. Do not be the man who shows up for hospitals and disappear for homework, birthdays, and ordinary Tuesdays. Ethan held her gaze and nodded once. Then I will start with Tuesday. Tuesday arrived with a pale spring rain drifting over Manhattan, the kind that turned sidewalks silver and made the city feel softer around the edges. At precisely 3:15 in the afternoon, Ethan stood outside the red brick elementary school on the Upper West Side, his coat damp at the shoulders, a folded umbrella in one hand, and a paper bag from the bakery Noah had mentioned in the other. For years his calendar had been ruled by acquisition calls, investor dinners, and private flights. Now every passing minute outside a second-grade classroom felt heavier than any board vote he had ever faced. He was early, deliberately so, because Amara's words had stayed with him in the quiet hours after the hospital. Do not disappear for ordinary Tuesdays. The dismissal bell rang, and children spilled out into the hallway in bright raincoats and backpacks, their voices bouncing off polished floors and bulletin boards lined with finger paintings and science fair posters. Ethan spotted Noah immediately. The navy hoodie, the silver lace sneakers, the astronomy backpack hanging crooked off one shoulder. For a second the boy froze in surprise, as if part of him had still expected this to be another adult promise that dissolved by sunset. Then his face broke into a smile so sudden and bright it made the whole gray afternoon feel warmer. You came, Noah said, rushing toward him. Ethan crouched slightly to meet his eyes. I told you I would. Noah looked down at the bakery bag. Is that from Levine? Ethan nodded. Double chocolate chip. You said it was your favorite. The boy's grin widened, and something in Ethan's chest settled into place. Not fixed, just aligned. They stepped out under the umbrella together, rain tapping softly above them as they walked the 3 blocks to Amara's townhouse. It was the first time Ethan had seen the life she built beyond hospital waiting rooms and gala ballrooms. The brownstone stood on a tree-lined street with black iron railings, warm light glowing through front windows, the scent of tomato soup and fresh bread drifting faintly from inside. It was elegant without trying to impress, lived in all the ways his penthouse never had been. Inside, Noah dropped his backpack by the stairs and immediately spread his homework folder across the dining table. Math first. he announced with the serious tone of someone repeating house rules he knew by heart. Ethan smiled as he took the seat beside him. Fractions. Word problems. A worksheet about distances between planets simplified into second-grade numbers. Noah tapped one question with his pencil. If Saturn is 900 million miles away, how long would it take a rocket going 10,000 miles an hour? Ethan laughed softly. That is a pretty serious Tuesday question. Noah shrugged with a grin. Mrs. Bennett says space makes everything cooler. Across the kitchen island, Amara stirred a pot on the stove, pretending not to listen, but Ethan could feel her attention in the small pauses between movements. He worked through the problem slowly with Noah, resisting every instinct to rush to the answer. It was not about being impressive. It was about being present. By the time they finished, Noah leaned against his arm with the easy trust of a child beginning to believe in routine. Can we still go to the planetarium Saturday? He asked. Ethan glanced toward Amara. She had turned off the stove now, resting one hand against the counter as she watched them. Her expression was unreadable for a moment, then softened just enough. Dr. Ellis said his numbers looked stable today, she said. As long as he rests Friday night. Noah threw both hands in the air like he had just won something enormous. Ethan laughed, the sound surprising even himself. Dinner was simple. Tomato soup, grilled cheese. Noah talking nonstop about constellations and how Jupiter's storm had lasted longer than anyone's career. Ethan listened to every word. Not because it was extraordinary, but because it was ordinary in the most sacred way. Halfway through the meal, Noah looked between them and asked with complete innocence, "Were you good at homework when you were little too?" The question landed softly but changed the air. Ethan answered before the silence could grow heavy. "Not always. My grandfather used to sit with me at the kitchen table until I figured it out." Noah nodded, satisfied, as if the answer fit neatly into the version of Ethan he was beginning to build. Later, as Noah brushed his teeth upstairs, Ethan stood near the kitchen window while rain streaked the glass in silver lines. Amara stepped beside him, close enough for the warmth of the room to bridge the years between them. "He noticed you were early," she said quietly. Ethan exhaled, watching reflections of city lights shimmer in the wet street below. "I needed him to know I was waiting before he was." Amara studied him in the silence that followed, and when she finally spoke, her voice carried something new. Not trust fully formed, but the first outline of it. Then maybe Tuesday was a good place to start. Saturday morning opened in clear blue light, the kind that made Manhattan feel almost gentle as Ethan's car pulled up outside the Hayden Planetarium. The glass sphere shimmered against the sky like a world suspended in air, and Noah pressed both hands against the window the moment he saw it. "It looks like a spaceship landed in New York," he whispered, his voice full of the kind of wonder that made every ordinary sound around them seem smaller. Ethan smiled as he stepped out first and opened the door for him. "Then today we are definitely in the right place." Noah jumped onto the sidewalk in his navy jacket, silver-laced sneakers flashing in the sun, and immediately tilted his head back to stare at the massive building. Amara followed more slowly, one hand resting lightly on Noah's shoulder, her eyes moving from the museum entrance to Ethan with a caution that had softened into something quieter over the week. She had agreed to come not because the past was repaired, but because Noah deserved a memory that belonged only to joy. Inside, the domed ceiling of the planetarium glowed with projected constellations, tiny stars scattered across artificial night. Noah stood beneath them, turning in slow circles, his face lit blue and silver by galaxies millions of miles away. Ethan stayed close, answering every question Noah asked with patient seriousness. Why do stars die? How long would it take to reach Mars? Whether Saturn's rings made sound in space. The answers mattered, but what mattered more was the rhythm forming between them. Noah asking, Ethan staying. Amara watching that quiet promise become something visible. Halfway through the dark matter exhibit, Noah's pace slowed. It was subtle at first, just a hesitation in his steps, one hand drifting toward his chest the way Ethan had begun to notice in unguarded moments. The excitement, the walking, the sensory overload of flashing lights and echoing voices had built into something too much. Amara saw it instantly. "Noah," she said softly, kneeling in front of him, her calm voice cutting through the crowded room like a steady hand. Noah gave a small nod. but his face had gone pale beneath the blue glow of the displays. Ethan crouched beside them, every instinct sharpened. "What does he need?" he asked. There was no panic in his tone now, only readiness. Amara looked at him for one brief second, and in that second she chose trust over habit. "Water. Quiet. 5 minutes." Ethan moved before she finished speaking, returning moments later with a bottle of water and leading them toward a bench tucked near the edge of the solar system gallery, where the room fell into softer shadows. Noah leaned against Ethan this time without thinking, small shoulder pressed to his side, while he sipped slowly. The gesture was so natural it almost undid Ethan. He kept still, letting the boy find steadiness in the simple fact that someone was there. After a few quiet minutes, Noah's color returned. He looked up at Ethan, embarrassed in the way children sometimes are when their bodies remind them of their limits. "Sorry," he murmured. Ethan shook his head immediately. "Do not apologize for needing a break." Noah studied him for a moment, then nodded, the tension in his shoulders easing. Amara sat beside them, her own breathing finally slowing now that the danger had passed. She watched Ethan unscrew the bottle cap again for Noah, listened as he quietly pointed out the glowing rings of Saturn rotating on the nearby display to keep his mind calm, and something in her expression changed. It was not dramatic. It was the smallest surrender of guardedness, the kind that comes when someone finally does what they promised in the exact moment it matters. Later, as they stood beneath the giant suspended planet models in the final exhibit hall, Noah slipped his hand into Ethan's without announcement, as if the decision had been made somewhere inside him during those quiet 5 minutes on the bench. Ethan looked down at their joined hands, then up at Amara. Her eyes met his across the soft museum light, and for the first time in years there was no distance in them, only the recognition of a truth she could no longer deny. He was not here for the dramatic reveal, the hospital scare, or the symbolic Tuesday. He was here for the fragile middle moments too. Noah tugged Ethan's hand and pointed up toward Saturn. "Next time," he said with complete certainty, "we should come when they do the laser stars show." Ethan smiled, his throat tightening around the simple beauty of the words "next time." "Then next time," he said softly, "we will sit in the front row." And as Noah laughed beneath the artificial stars, Amara stood beside them and allowed herself, for the first time since that night 7 years ago, to imagine a future that did not begin with running. Monday evening arrived wrapped in amber sunset, the kind of soft Manhattan light that turned the windows of Amara's townhouse into sheets of gold. Inside, the warmth of the kitchen carried the scent of roasted chicken, rosemary potatoes, and the faint sweetness of Noah's favorite cornbread muffins cooling on the counter. It was the first dinner that felt less like an arrangement and more like the beginning of a rhythm. Noah sat at the table in his dinosaur pajamas, even though it was barely 6:30, swinging his legs and explaining in great detail why Saturn was still better than Jupiter despite the latter having more moons. Ethan listened with the full attention of a man learning that love often sounds like a 7-year-old making passionate arguments over dinner rolls. Amara moved between the stove and the table, her sleeves rolled up, curls loosely pinned back, the ordinary intimacy of the scene striking Ethan harder than any memory from the boardroom ever had. This was the life he had missed. Not headlines. Not milestones polished for photographs. This. Soup cooling in bowls. Homework still tucked in a backpack by the stairs. Noah's laughter bouncing against the walls of a home built from steadiness. Halfway through dinner, Ethan's phone buzzed across the table. The screen lit with a name he had not been ready to see. Evelyn Whitmore. His mother. The air shifted before he even touched the device. Amara's hand stilled over Noah's glass of milk, and Ethan saw the years of instinctive caution return to her face. He picked up the phone and silenced it without answering. A minute later it rang again. Then again. Noah looked between them, sensing the change in the room the way children always do. "Who is it?" he asked. Ethan set the phone face down on the table. "Someone I need to speak to," he said carefully, refusing to let the moment carry any weight Noah could feel. After dinner, while Noah was upstairs brushing his teeth and arguing with gravity over why toothpaste should not fall off a brush in space, Ethan stepped into the quiet of the front parlor. The city outside hummed in distant traffic and rainless spring wind. He answered on the fourth call. "Mother." Her voice arrived cool and polished, untouched by the years it had stolen. I heard from the gala committee that Amara Brooks resurfaced. Ethan closed his eyes for one measured breath. Even now, she framed people as events, as disruptions to be managed. She did not resurface, he said, his tone low and controlled. She rebuilt a life after you forced her to disappear. Silence stretched on the line, thin and dangerous. Then Evelyn sighed, as if discussing a disappointing market trend. I protected the company. I protected your future. Ethan looked through the parlor doorway toward the staircase where Noah's laughter drifted faintly from upstairs. You protected an image, he said, at the cost of 7 years with my son. The word son landed harder than anything else he had said to her in his life. His mother's voice sharpened, but still never rose. You are thinking emotionally. This can still be contained before the board begins asking questions. Ethan let the old world she represented hang there for one final second. The containment, the control, the belief that human lives were variables in quarterly risk. Then he answered with a calm she would understand better than anger. There is nothing to contain. Noah is my son. Amara is part of my life. And if the board has questions, they can ask me directly. He ended the call before she could answer. When he turned, Amara was standing in the doorway, one hand resting lightly against the frame, her expression unreadable. She had heard enough. Not everything. Enough. You said his name to her, she said quietly. Ethan nodded. I should have said it years ago. For a moment, neither of them moved. The room held only the ticking of the mantel clock and the muffled sound of Noah's footsteps overhead. Then Amara stepped farther into the room, the golden light from the hallway soft against her skin. I spent years believing your world would always choose itself over us, she admitted, her voice low and unguarded in a way he had never heard before. Ethan took one careful step closer. Then let me spend the rest of my life proving it can choose differently. Before she could answer, Noah's voice called from the stairs, bright and urgent. Mom, Ethan, come see this. I made Saturn out of toothpaste foam. The tension broke like glass turning into laughter. Amara looked toward the staircase, then back at Ethan, and the smallest smile touched her lips. Ordinary Monday, she said softly. Ethan smiled back, feeling the truth of it settle deep. The best kind. And as they climbed the stairs together toward a child's excited voice and a bathroom mirror full of accidental stars, the future no longer felt fragile. It felt lived in. The next Thursday arrived wrapped in spring sunlight and the soft chaos of elementary school excitement. Colorful paper planets hung from the ceiling of Noah's classroom, each one suspended by string at different heights, gently turning in the air every time the door opened. The annual science showcase had transformed the second-grade wing into a miniature galaxy of poster boards, baking soda volcanoes, and carefully painted constellations. Ethan stepped into the classroom beside Amara, his suit jacket replaced with a simple navy sweater, the kind of choice that said he had learned some rooms required presence more than polish. Noah stood near the back by a trifold display titled Saturn, the most beautiful planet, his. Silver-laced sneakers planted wide with nervous determination. Glittering rings circled the paper model he had spent all week building with Ethan at the townhouse dining table, every strip of painted cardboard cut on ordinary evenings after homework and dinner. You made it, Noah said, relief flooding his voice the second he saw them both. Ethan crouched beside the display, careful not to disturb the tiny foam moons suspended by fishing line. I would not miss the launch of the most important mission in Manhattan. Noah laughed, the nerves in his shoulders loosening as other parents drifted through the room balancing coffee cups and camera phones. Mrs. Bennett clapped her hands for attention, calling the students into presentation order. The room filled with the rustle of excited whispers, sneakers on tile, and the low murmur of proud parents finding space along the walls. Amara stood with her hands folded lightly in front of her, watching Noah smooth the corners of his poster board one last time. Ethan moved to stand beside her, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. It was a small thing, but after everything, it felt like an answer. Noah's turn came third. He stepped to the front of his display, chin lifted with the same quiet steadiness Amara carried into every room. Saturn is my favorite because even the broken pieces around it stay in orbit, he began, his young voice clear in the bright classroom. The words settled over Ethan with a force that left him still. He had helped Noah rehearse the facts about rings, moons, and atmospheric storms, But this line was new. Noah glanced toward Ethan for the briefest second before continuing. The rings are made of ice and rock and dust, and even though there are millions of pieces, they stay together because gravity gives them something to hold on to. Around the room, parents smiled, but Ethan felt the truth beneath the science. Broken pieces, staying together, a system held in place by something invisible but real. He looked at Amara, and she had heard it too. Her eyes met his with a softness that had once felt impossible. Noah finished to warm applause, his grin bright and proud as Mrs. Bennett handed him a blue ribbon for creative presentation. The classroom buzzed as families moved closer to admire the projects. Ethan stepped forward, kneeling to Noah's level. "That was incredible," he said. Noah's cheeks flushed with pride. "I changed the opening last night," he admitted. "I wanted it to sound true." Ethan swallowed around the sudden tightness in his throat. It did. Then came the moment neither of them expected. Another boy from Noah's class wandered over with his parents and pointed at Ethan. "Is that your dad? He helped make the rings, right?" The question hung in the warm classroom air, simple and innocent. Noah looked up at Ethan, then at Amara, and for one heartbeat the entire room seemed to quiet around them. Ethan did not move. He did not rescue the moment or shape it. He let Noah choose. The boy's small hand slipped into his, steady and certain. "Yes," Noah said, his voice soft but clear enough to reach every corner of Ethan's world. "That is my dad." The word landed without spectacle, without witnesses beyond a second-grade classroom full of paper planets and juice boxes, and yet it felt bigger than every gala, boardroom, and skyline Ethan had ever stood inside. Amara turned her face slightly, blinking against the emotion she no longer needed to hide. There was no grand reconciliation in the moment, no dramatic promise, only the simple, sacred truth of a child naming what had finally become real. Later, as they walked home beneath budding trees and a pale blue spring sky, Noah skipped a few steps ahead, the blue ribbon fluttering from his backpack. Ethan slowed beside Amara on the sidewalk. "He said it," he murmured, still half in disbelief. Amara looked ahead at Noah, her smile quiet and luminous. He waited until it felt safe. Ethan let the words settle deep inside him. Safety, trust, the ordinary repetition of showing up. They had built this not in one dramatic night, but in Tuesdays, hospital benches, homework pages, and planetarium lights. Noah turned back toward them with the easy confidence of a child who no longer carried invisible questions alone. "Come on," he called, lifting the ribbon high. "We have to put this next to the Saturn model." Ethan and Amara followed him down the sunlit block, and for the first time in 7 years, the shape of their future no longer felt uncertain. It felt named. 2 weeks later, the city opened into one of those perfect early summer evenings when the sky over Manhattan turned lavender and gold, and every window seemed to hold a little extra light. The rooftop of the Whitmore Observatory Foundation was filled with soft jazz, glowing lanterns, and the quiet hum of guests gathering for the annual Children's Science Scholarship Ceremony. But for Ethan, none of the donors, executives, or carefully arranged speeches mattered. His attention stayed on the small hand tucked securely in his as Noah stood beside him at the edge of the terrace, dressed in a navy blazer and silver tie, looking out over the skyline with wide-eyed wonder. "It looks like the whole city is made of stars," Noah whispered. Ethan smiled and squeezed his hand gently. "Tonight, it kind of is." Across the terrace, Amara stood near the glass railing in an elegant deep blue dress, the evening breeze moving softly through her curls. She was speaking with Dr. Ellis and Mrs. Bennett, the 3 women laughing quietly as the skyline reflected in the windows behind them. There was ease in her now, the kind born from no longer carrying everything alone. Over the last 2 weeks, Ethan had done exactly what he promised. He had shown up for Tuesday homework, Friday cardiology check-ins, Saturday pancakes, and even the ordinary Monday argument about why a backpack should not be left on the staircase. Redemption had not arrived in a grand speech. It had been built in repetition, in showing up before being asked, in learning the sacred weight of small promises. When the event host tapped the microphone, the terrace softened into attentive silence. "Tonight," she said, "we are proud to announce the Whitmore Young Explorers Scholarship, dedicated to children who dream beyond what they can already see." Noah looked up at Ethan with startled excitement. "That is the one you told me about." Ethan nodded. It is. The host smiled toward the front row of young scholarship finalists, then added, and this year the scholarship is being renamed in honor of the boy whose courage reminded us all why the future deserves protecting. Noah blinked in confusion as the giant screen behind the podium lit up with an image of Saturn, its rings glowing silver against deep black space. Beneath it appeared the words the Noah Brooks Whitmore Explorer Award. The terrace filled with warm applause. Noah turned to Ethan, speechless, then to Amara, whose hand had lifted to her mouth in quiet surprise. Ethan knelt beside his son, bringing himself eye level with the wonder shining in those gray-blue eyes. I wanted your name attached to something that tells other children they can dream big, even when life asks them to be brave too soon. Noah's face crumpled into the kind of overwhelmed joy only children can carry without hiding. He threw his arms around Ethan's neck, holding tight. Thank you, Dad, he whispered, the word now effortless, lived in real. Ethan closed his eyes for a moment, holding him with the kind of care that had once been stolen by years and silence. Across the terrace, Amara watched them, her expression luminous in the city light. When Noah was led toward the front for the honorary ribbon presentation, Ethan rose and crossed the few steps that still remained between him and her. For years those steps had been measured in fear, absence, and the damage done by other people's choices. Tonight they felt simple, earned. He stopped in front of her, the skyline glowing behind her like a world rebuilt. I spent years searching for where you went, he said quietly, his voice almost lost beneath the music and summer wind. I never understood that what mattered was becoming the man worth being found. Amara looked at him for a long moment, the city reflected in her eyes, then smiled with the same quiet dignity that had once walked away from everything to protect a child. And now you know where to stay. It was not a dramatic declaration. It was something better. A truth shaped by Tuesdays, science fairs, hospital benches, and every ordinary promise kept. On the stage, Noah lifted his ribbon high under the lantern lights, laughing as the crowd applauded. Ethan reached for Amara's hand, and this time she let her fingers rest fully in his. No fear, no running, just the warmth of a future that had finally caught up to the love waiting inside it. Above them, the first stars appeared over Manhattan, faint but steady, and Noah pointed upward from the stage with a grin bright enough to rival the skyline. Look, he called. Saturn would be right there. Ethan and Amara looked up together, and in the quiet wonder of that shared gaze, the years of loss no longer defined them. What defined them now was what they built after the search ended. A family held together not by perfection, but by gravity, trust, and the choice to remain in orbit around one another no matter how far life once pulled them apart.